thought you knew everything about Disney's darkest experiment, you were wrong. The Black Hole was not just a troubled production, it was a cursed set, a financial nightmare, and a film that destroyed careers. Part 1 was just the surface, now we are diving deeper into the madness. The accidents they covered up, the deleted scenes, too disturbing to release, and the real reason Disney tried to erase this movie from history. Buckle up, this is the Black Hole Part 2.
The black hole wasn't Disney magic. It was Disney's nightmare in space. But behind the stars and the spectacle, it was collapse on every level. A disaster film reborn as science fiction, scripts torn apart until nothing was left, and a studio forced to build its own effects empire from scratch. These are 20 weird facts about the black hole, and hidden inside the wreckage and the abyss, it was Disney trading fairy dust for firestorms. The wonder turned to dread, and the nightmare still lingers. Number 1. Before lightsabers ruled box offices, disaster movies ruled Hollywood. Cruise ships, skyscrapers, burning planes, doomed vessels full of desperate survivors. That was the craze when writers Bob Barbash and Richard Landau walked into Disney with a pitch they called the Poseidon Adventure in Space. No Jedi, no laser duels, just a starship drifting toward a cosmic abyss, with a crew fighting to survive. Disney liked the bones of it, but shelved the idea. Then Star Wars detonated in 1977. Suddenly the old draft was dusted off, stripped for parts, and rebuilt with robots, lasers, and space battles. Yet beneath the shiny veneer, the DNA remained. The black hole played less like a space opera and more like a disaster film. A doomed ship, a frantic crew, and a plunge into chaos written in the stars. Number 2. When writers Bob Barbash and Richard Landau first pitched their idea in the early 70s, the script didn't even contain a black hole. The working title was Space Station 1, a flat, generic name that could have belonged to any pulp paperback. The story was closer to a standard space drama about a drifting crew than the cosmic descent audiences eventually saw. Only later, when producers realized the project needed a hook, did the concept of a black hole get folded in. Suddenly, the mystery deepened, the stakes sharpened, and the title itself promised danger that no spaceship could escape. What began as a bland station story was reborn with one of the most evocative titles in sci-fi, proof that sometimes a single word can drag an entire movie into the abyss. Number 3. By the mid-1970s, Disney was ready to abandon its strange space disaster project. Scripts had stalled, directors walked away, and the studio quietly shelved it as too costly and too odd. But producer Winston Hibbler refused to let go. A veteran of Disney's golden age, he rallied a team of artists who still believed. Robert McCall, whose cosmic paintings had defined 2001: A Space Odyssey, delivered vast starfields and impossible ships plunging toward the void. Disney legend Peter Ellenshaw added eerie matte designs, gothic towers floating in space. Their images weren't just concept art, they were lifelines. Proof the project could be grand and visionary, rather than a pale Star Wars imitation. Momentum built again, until tragedy struck. Hibbler died suddenly, leaving the film adrift once more. Most projects would have collapsed, but Ron Miller, Walt Disney's son-in-law, stepped in as producer and refused to let the vision vanish. He kept McCall and Ellenshaw's work at the center, using their art to rally support until cameras finally rolled. The black hole didn't survive because it was flawless. It survived because a handful of artists refused to stop sketching the dream. Number 4. For nearly a decade, the black hole was trapped in rewrite purgatory. The earliest drafts leaned into disaster movie formulas, but each new writer pulled it in a stranger direction. At one point, it was a survival thriller, then a gothic horror about a haunted starship drifting through the void. Director John Ho was the first to walk away, unimpressed with what Disney handed him. Others followed, leaving behind fragments of tone and half-built subplots that never quite connected. When Gary Nelson finally took the job, it wasn't because the script won him over, it was because the concept art dazzled him. Still, he inherited pages that had been torn apart and stitched back together so many times that even Alan Dean Foster, hired to adapt it into a novel, admitted the science didn't hold. Foster quietly made his own correction notes just to keep the plot from collapsing under its contradictions. What emerged on screen was less a single vision and more a Frankenstein creation, born from a revolving door of voices. The black hole didn't follow a clear map. It stumbled forward through compromise and desperation, rewriting itself all the way to the finish line. Number 5. When Star Wars exploded in 1977, every studio scrambled to catch the wave. Disney wanted in, but there was a problem. The miracle workers at Industrial Light and Magic were already locked into The Empire Strikes Back. Renting their tech wasn't an option, so Disney gambled on something radical. They would build their own ILM from scratch. The experiment became ACES, the Automated Camera Effects System, a motion control rig so advanced it could glide past miniatures with microscopic precision, locking spaceships into perfect motion frame by frame. Surrounded by vast matte paintings and layered models, ACES gave the black hole its dizzying scope. Cathedral-like ships stretching across sound stages, eerie starfields, and spacecraft drifting in choreographed silence around the abyss. Even the opening credits pushed boundaries. A pulsing green wireframe grid, the longest computer graphic sequence audiences had ever seen in 1979. It was expensive. It broke down. It nearly swallowed the budget whole. But for Disney, it was a revelation. Their homegrown ILM didn't save the black hole at the box office, yet it planted the spark of something bigger. Years before Tron or Toy Story, the Mouse House had already begun building its digital future, one painstaking frame at a time. Number 6. The Cygnus wasn't built like a starship, it was built like a church. Designer Peter Ellenshaw modeled it after Notre Dame, lining it with Gothic arches, buttresses, and cruciform shapes. Lit from within, it glowed not like machinery, but like stained glass. The result was haunting, a spaceship that felt more like a cathedral adrift in the void. On screen, it turned the black hole into a strange blend of sci-fi and gothic horror, a voyage less about exploration than damnation. Where most space movies showed rockets and steel, Disney showed something sacred, silent, and terrifying. A cosmic cathedral drifting into eternity. Number 7. When Disney set out to score The Black Hole, they didn't want a Saturday morning adventure. They wanted majesty. They turned to John Barry, the British composer who had already defined James Bond's swagger with brass and strings. In 1979, Barry's schedule was cosmic. He had just finished sending Bond to space in Moonraker, then plunged headlong into Disney's darkest gamble. What he delivered was unlike anything the studio had ever heard. Sweeping, sinister, and operatic, Barry's score fused lush romantic themes with an undercurrent of dread, perfectly mirroring the film's gothic starship and descent into the abyss. And before the first image even flickered on screen, audiences were met with something rare, a full overture. The theater darkened, and Barry's music swelled for minutes on its own, echoing back to the grand tradition of Ben-Hur, Gone with the Wind, and other epics where music was spectacle. By coincidence, 1979 delivered two such farewells, The Black Hole and Star Trek. The motion picture both featured overtures, and both would be the last major studio films to do so. After that, Hollywood closed the curtain on the overture era. Barry's haunting composition didn't just score Disney's strangest sci-fi, it carried the final echo of a bygone cinematic ritual, fading into silence as the blockbuster age took over. Number 8. For decades, Disney meant innocence, animated musicals, fairy tale castles, safe family laughs. But in 1979, The Black Hole shattered that image. It became the studio's first PG-rated movie, and families walked in expecting whimsy only to be confronted by death, darkness, and dread. Middle-aged scientists debated morality, crew members were crushed by machines, and robots tore each other apart in ways that felt shockingly violent for the Mouse House. Characters muttered hell and damn, words Disney had once forbidden. For kids raised on Mary Poppins or bedknobs and broomsticks, it was a jarring shift. Parents weren't sure whether to cover their children's eyes or admit that Disney had changed, and in truth, it had. The gamble didn't deliver the Star Wars-sized box office miracle the studio had hoped for, but it cracked something open. Suddenly, Disney could chase darker, riskier ideas. Without The Black Hole, there's no Tron, no Return to Oz, no 80s experiments in live-action fantasy that dared to push boundaries. The film didn't just test audiences, it tested Disney's identity, and though it stumbled at the box office, it proved one lasting truth. Even the world's most family-friendly studio had a shadow side. Number 9. Casting The Black Hole could have rewritten sci-fi history. Director Gary Nelson wanted a fresh face for the female lead, a young actress named Sigourney Weaver. She auditioned, but Disney's casting chief dismissed her outright, saying her name was too unattractive for marquee value. Weaver walked away, and months later stunned the world as Ripley in Alien. The irony still stings. The very studio that branded her unmarketable had passed on the woman who would redefine the genre. Instead, Disney played it safe. They cast Yvette Mimieux, a familiar star from The Time Machine, and one of the most recognizable faces in the studio's live-action stable. She wasn't Ripley. Her role as Dr. Kate McRae leaned into quiet intelligence rather than action heroics. But Mimieux quietly made history. She became the first female scientist lead in a Disney live-action film, a milestone that slipped past most audiences at the time. The contrast is haunting. One studio executive's dismissal helped steer Weaver toward Alien, a role that made her an icon, and Disney, clinging to tradition, got a milestone instead of a revolution. Both mattered, but only one shaped the future of science fiction. Number 10. For audiences in 1979, the biggest shock of The Black Hole wasn't just the science fiction, it was seeing Norman Bates on a Disney starship. Anthony Perkins, forever etched into history for Psycho, took the role of Dr. Alex Durant, a soft-spoken scientist who admired Maximilian Schell's charismatic madman a little too much. Perkins played him with quiet intensity, hinting at obsession beneath the surface. But his exit was pure horror, crushed to death by the red robot Maximilian's spinning blades, in what was easily one of the most violent moments Disney had ever put on screen. It was unsettling, graphic, and unforgettable, the kind of death no one expected from the studio of fairy tales. In a film already straining against Disney's family image, Perkins's grim fate marked the point of no return. Number 11. On paper, The Black Hole had a heavyweight cast: Maximilian Schell, Anthony Perkins, Robert Forster. But two of the most memorable performances came from stars who weren't even credited. The sleek, logical robot Vincent spoke with the crisp, reassuring tones of Roddy McDowall, a Hollywood legend from Planet of the Apes. His battered counterpart, Bob, rasped with the familiar Texas drawl of Slim Pickens, the cowboy actor who once rode a nuclear bomb in Dr. Strangelove. Disney didn't want audiences to know. Executives feared that if the actors' names appeared in the credits, the illusion would break. Viewers would imagine McDowall and Pickens in sound booths instead of believing in living machines. So the studio deliberately erased their contributions, leaving the robots to stand alone. The irony is rich. The two characters audiences loved most were built on voices Disney tried to hide. Legends disguised as machines, haunting the film like ghosts inside the grid. Number 12. Audiences loved the battered little robot Bob, but his look didn't come easy. When Disney's model shop first presented the design, director Gary Nelson hated it. To him, the character looked far too clean, polished, and perfect, nothing like the dented survivor he imagined. So Nelson grabbed a baseball bat, stormed over to the clay maquette, and smashed it himself, pounding until it looked crooked, lopsided, and scarred. The crew rebuilt Bob to match the battered prototype, giving him a fragile, vulnerable presence that contrasted with the gleaming Cygnus. On screen, that broken-down look made him instantly sympathetic, the underdog machine audiences rooted for. Ironically, one of Disney's most beloved robots was born not from precision, but from destruction. Number 13. Disney briefly hired legendary sci-fi writer Harlan Ellison to consult on The Black Hole. Known for his brilliance and his temper, Ellison didn't even last past lunch. Sitting in the studio commissary, he reportedly pitched an outrageous idea, an X-rated animated film starring Disney's own characters. He thought it was a joke. But at the next table sat Roy E. Disney himself, and he didn't laugh. By the end of of the meal, Ellison was out the door. He later claimed it was misunderstood humor, but eyewitnesses swore he was dead serious. The whole episode became another bizarre footnote in the film's troubled history, proof that the black hole was chaotic even before the cameras rolled. Number 14. Alan Dean Foster was hired to turn the black hole into a novelization, a routine job for Hollywood tie-ins. But when he read the script, he was stunned by how little of the science made sense. Instead of quietly adapting, Foster drafted a detailed list of errors, impossible physics, contradictory logic, and black hole rules that broke under scrutiny. He sent it to Disney, hoping to nudge the story towards something more believable. The memo rattled executives so much they called a special meeting just to decide whether to listen. In the end, almost nothing changed. Foster wrote the book anyway, but the incident exposed the truth. Disney wasn't chasing accuracy. They were chasing spectacle, even if the science collapsed before the movie hit the screen. Number 15. For all its chaos, the black hole managed to impress the Academy. In 1980, it earned 2 Oscar nominations, one for Best Cinematography and one for Best Visual Effects. It was a rare honor for Disney, a studio better known for animation than live-action spectacle. The visuals, sweeping matte paintings, miniatures, and a CES camera wizardry stood shoulder to shoulder with films that had far smoother productions. And cinematographer Frank Phillips' moody lighting turned the Cygnus into a haunted cathedral adrift in space. The film lost both awards, but the recognition mattered. It proved Disney could compete in serious sci-fi, even if the movie itself was uneven. For a studio still seen as the House of Fairy Tales, those Oscar nods were like stepping into an entirely new orbit. Number 16. By the late 70s, Disney was desperate to prove it could compete with Star Wars. The black hole became their moonshot. At nearly $20 million, it was the most expensive film the studio had ever attempted, a sum so massive it rattled the very company coffers. Sets stretched across sound stages, miniatures glowed under thousands of lights, and entire divisions were built just to pull off the effects. On the page, it was science fiction, but behind the scenes, it was closer to a financial black hole, swallowing money at a terrifying pace. When the film finally premiered in December 1979, expectations were sky high, but the box office told a harsher truth: about $35 million worldwide. Not a bomb, but nowhere near the cultural thunderclap Disney had gambled for. Critics dismissed it as too dark, too strange, even too slow for a blockbuster. Families who came expecting Star Wars left unsettled by visions of hell and heaven in space. Yet time did something the box office couldn't. Its eerie tone, gothic visuals, and surreal ending refused to vanish. What was once branded a costly mistake is now remembered as a bold experiment, Disney's strangest jewel, a film too odd to succeed and too haunting to be forgotten. Number 17. Disney hoped the black hole would mint a merchandising empire like Star Wars. Mego rolled out a full line of action figures, from the sinister Maximilian to the dented underdog Bob, unusually detailed for the late 70s. But kids weren't interested. Unlike lightsabers and stormtroopers, these figures gathered dust on toy shelves, quietly disappearing within a year. The film's darker tone and limited fan base left the line stranded, an experiment that fizzled as fast as the box office. Decades later, though, that failure became gold. Collectors now hunt for those figures, especially the rarer pieces, which fetch hundreds of dollars at auctions. The toys may have vanished from playgrounds, but in hindsight, they outlived the movie's theatrical run, relics of a Disney gamble too strange to market and too unique to forget. Number 18. For kids rattled by the black hole's nightmarish ending, Disney offered a strange lifeline, not in theaters but on the page. Whitman Comics launched with a 2-part adaptation, then dared to go further with Beyond the Black Hole, a direct sequel that picked up where the film cut off. The Palomino crew pressed deeper into the void, through visions of fire and light that the movie only hinted at. But the voyage collapsed. After just 2 issues, the series was canceled, abandoning readers on a cliffhanger that would never resolve. Over time, those fragments became a collector's enigma. Early issues surface easily, but the final chapter remains one of sci-fi's rarest treasures. In the end, the comics mirrored the film itself, bold, unsettling, and unfinished, leaving fans trapped in a mystery that refused to close. Number 19. Disney hoped the black hole would capture the thrills of Star Wars. Instead, its true legacy seeped into a darker corner of cinema. The Cygnus loomed like a floating cathedral, its endless corridors patrolled by faceless drones, while the finale plunged audiences through visions of fire, light, and something disturbingly spiritual. Too strange for 1979, those images lingered in the minds of later filmmakers. Critics now trace direct echoes in the haunted ship terror of Event Horizon, 1997, and the cosmic dread of Sunshine, 2007. Even when dismissed as a failed blockbuster, the black hole gave permission for space to be more than adventure. It could be nightmare, revelation, and mystery all at once. A reminder that sometimes the strangest films cast the longest shadows. Number 20. When Disney rebooted the grid in 2010 with Tron Legacy, they tucked in a subtle nod to the studio's earlier sci-fi gamble. In Sam Flynn's bedroom, a poster of the black hole hangs quietly on the wall. And just moments later, eagle-eyed viewers can spot a figure of B.O.B., the battered robot from the original film, sitting on a nearby shelf. A blink and you'll miss it tribute to Disney's first dark space epic. For casual viewers, it was just set dressing. But for fans who grew up with the 1979 original, it meant something more. It was proof that even decades later, the film still haunted Disney's vision of futuristic worlds, a forgotten shadow glowing inside their boldest digital dream. Bonus fact: no one expected Disney's darkest film to end like this. Instead of a clean escape, the black hole spiraled into surreal terror. Maximilian, the towering red robot, was shown fused with his master in a vision of eternal damnation, a twisted figure trapped inside a mechanical hellscape. The surviving crew, meanwhile, drifted through a glowing cathedral of light, a haunting sequence that felt like purgatory, salvation, or both. Children left theaters shaken, some in tears, while adults debated whether Disney had slipped theology, nightmare, or madness onto the screen. The studio never clarified, leaving the images to burn into memory. That ambiguity turned the finale finale into legend, one of the boldest, most terrifying codas ever attached to a Disney movie. The Black Hole was no ordinary Disney film. It was a nightmare stitched into starlight. Too dark for children, too strange for critics, too ambitious for the studio that made it. It terrified young audiences, baffled adults. And yet, for those who looked deeper, it revealed something rare: beauty inside the abyss. What began as a disaster movie in space became a cult legend, Disney's boldest gamble and its strangest treasure.
Black Hole was not just a movie, it was a battle between art and commerce, ambition and fear, vision and compromise. It tried to be everything and became something stranger than anyone intended. Part 1 showed you the chaos, Part 2 showed you the scars, and somewhere in Disney's world, the real version of this film exists. And the one that was too dark, too violent, and too honest to release. Maybe one day we will see it. Until then, we are left with the beautiful wreckage. Drop a comment if you want part 3, because trust me, there's even more bangers we did not cover. Hit subscribe because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you think, really.